you all. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And lovely to see that we've had some time to chat and get to know each other a bit as well this morning, which is lovely. So my name is Clare Fussell, and I'm the Campaign Director at Operation Noah. And I thought I'd start off with a bit of an introduction to Operation Noah, because some of you I know are familiar with the organisation, and others may be the first time you've encountered us. So I want to give a bit of an overview of who we are. So we're an ecumenical Christian charity working with the church to inspire action on the climate crisis. And we aim to provide sort of leadership and focus and momentum behind some of the activities that are already happening across churches in the UK and Ireland. And we're primarily a campaigning organisation, so we try and push for greater action from within church institutions, but we also produce educational and worship materials for use in and with and by churches on environmental themes. So we've been going for 20 years. Last November we celebrated our 20-year anniversary with a service at St John's, Waterloo, and we were set up originally in 2004 by Green Christian and Churches Together in Britain and Ireland. So it was a sort of joint initiative in response to the fact that there weren't any Christian charities at the time in the UK focusing on the climate crisis. And of course, 20 years on, the situation has changed quite significantly, and it's a lot more of a mainstream issue for many of us. And when we started, it was very much focused on getting churches to take political action, so focusing on politicians and governmental processes. And we soon realised that actually, in order to have an authentic and commanding voice in this area, the church needed to get its own house in order. So we had a successful divestment campaign for a number of years, persuading church denominations to move their money out of fossil fuels and instead invest in climate solutions. And the majority of UK denominations have now made that transition and no longer fund fossil fuels, which is wonderful. But now we have three main campaign areas. One is around churches' financial investments, which of course we're all gathered to discuss here this morning. But we also focus on church land use. And that's everything from churchyards up to big denominational land holdings, and encouraging churches to use their land for environmental benefit. So that might be increasing biodiversity, restoring habitats for nature, or thinking about carbon sequestration, planting trees, restoring peatlands, or renewables, solar, wind, using church land for these sorts of things. And we still do have a third campaign area around church divestment, but it's more sort of reactive than proactive now. So we're very open to supporting churches who haven't yet made that divestment commitment. But as the majority have, we're sort of stepping back a little from that area. So we have, although we're an ecumenical group, we also support interfaith work, and we bring a Christian voice to mainstream climate campaigns as well. So we'll often see Operation Noah and our banners at other events so that we can bring a Christian element into those. And we have particularly strong links with the Catholic Church and religious orders. So it's wonderful to see some familiar faces here this morning, and some that that are new as well, that we haven't met you before, to explore some of these issues specifically within the context of the Catholic Church. So before I hand over to Bokani, who's going to give a bit more of an introduction to today's topic, I thought I would introduce you to our speakers. Oh, there we go. So we have the way that we're going to structure today, you have an agenda in your packs. It's quite simple. We're going to hear from 4 speakers, only for 10 minutes each. We're trying to keep it quite short so that we can have then a decent amount of time for some small group discussion, and we'd love this to be a true round table where we're hearing from you. There's a lot of expertise in the room, there's a lot of experience in this area, and we'd love to be able to hear your voices and open up space for discussion. So we'll try and keep this relatively short, and then we have some follow-up actions and things for you to take away. So our first speaker is Dr. Martin Poulsom, and he is a Salesian of Don Bosco, which is a Roman Catholic religious order that specialises in youth ministry. But he's also a senior lecturer in theology at the University of Roehampton. and specialises in the theology of creation and combines this with taking really practical action around justice and peace work. And that includes, of course, his role with Operation Noah and serving on our board. And we're also really pleased to welcome Josephine Carlson, who many of you may know through her role as chair of the Church Investors Group. Is that right? Secretary to the Church Investors Group. But the Church Ethics Lead for CCLA as well, which is a specialist investment body for religious orders and charities and the public sector, and also brings decades of experience working with faith-based charities and church institutions. So she's going to introduce the recent guidance on church investment from the Church Investors Group. And we are welcoming John O'Shaughnessy, who is visiting us from the United States, from St. Louis, who is the CFO for the Franciscan Sisters of Mary, which is a Roman Catholic order of women religious in North America, and you're serving over 30 years, I think now, John, is that right? So brings a wealth of experience in managing the finances and the investments. Hello, welcome, come on in. And in that time has spearheaded work on investment for impact. So he's going to be talking to us a little bit about their impact investing and directed philanthropy and advocacy work. And then finally, I'm going to hand to Bokani. Bokani Tshidzu is the longest serving member of our team at Operation Noah, and she works specifically with Catholic churches and institutions within our organisation, and she'll present what's on your table in front of you, a hot off the press toolkit that some of you have fed into on CST and climate investing.
Great, thank you and welcome. Thank you so much for making it. I know some of you have come from as far as Wolverhampton. So shortly, I'll ask everybody to just make a very short introduction, who you are, which organisation you are here representing, and just so that we get to know each other. A big part of today was to start to form some of those connections. Part of what inspired today was recognizing that often we are looking at a lot of statistics, a lot of reports, a lot of data, and some of the things that we talk about may seem very much either theoretical or purely we're looking at what profits or what returns we might get. And part of what we wanted to do today is sort of take a step back and think about, well, how do the decisions that we're making on the committees that we sit on inform and shape the world around us? We have all seen and experienced, especially in the last year, some more extreme weather events, and we all know what has been causing that. So climate change, as affected by human activity, has been showing and already is affecting some of the most vulnerable in our societies. And so part of what we wanted to think about today is, well, what is it that we are called to do, particularly as Catholic organizations? Scientists have been warning us that if we don't act effectively in response to the climate crisis, we're going to see, if anything, even more of this extreme weather, and the human impacts are likely to worsen dramatically. And we see some of these effects in the communities that we serve, in the communities that we live in, and in the communities that are... Okay. Sorry. Well, just turn that off. Okay. Sometimes I think the voice of God is speaking to me literally. Right. So to come back to the communities that we are working with and the communities that we're serving, often we think about the impacts of the climate crisis being quite far away and perhaps not necessarily on our doorstep, but we've started to see those impacts at home where we are, and I'm sure for many of you who work with communities all around the world, they're starting to experience the extreme flooding, the droughts, the impacts on livelihoods, and access to water and food. And so we've heard the call from, oops, sorry, I wanted to go back. And so we've heard the call from Pope Francis. So in some churches, we might say, oh, we don't have enough leadership from the church. For us, it's actually the exact opposite. If anything, we have excellent leadership from the church. And what we're asked to do is to put that in practice. So part of what we wanted to do with this morning is really look at what is the tradition in the Catholic Church, what has the teaching been for quite some time, and how do we start to implement that in our day-to-day lives? How do we implement that specifically in our investments? Now, many reports and publications have come out from the Vatican encouraging us to put our charisms into our decisions and how we use our resources. And part of what we wanted to say as Operation Noah is that our focus is specifically on climate. And in part, it's specifically on climate because we think there's something that the church can do and say and be a real beacon of hope in. And second of all, because we see that climate impacts everything from our quality of life to our relations with each other. So I'll come to speak to that a little bit more further on. But for now, I just wanted to invite us to really think about how do we use our resources in line with Catholic social teaching. And for that, I will lead on to Martin Poulsom, who will give us an introduction into the Church's teaching and tradition, and then we can go from there. Thank you.
Great, good. What I'd like to do this morning is to invite us to explore the question, what is CST? Because I think there's a traditional Catholic answer to this and a traditional Catholic description of what CST is. And I think it's a useful one, but maybe it's not the whole story. And I think if we ponder what CST could stand for in our Catholic understanding of how the church works, maybe it might be easier for us to see how all of us in this room can be part of CST and how therefore the way that investments are carried out in Catholic organisations can be part of CST. And I think that's a really exciting possibility for us. And I think it also means that we are opening up a possibility for ourselves to be part of the church in the way that Pope Francis describes the church, as a body of people on a journey, as a pilgrim people of God, as a group of pilgrims of hope, as we are celebrating this year in the Jubilee year. So what does CST typically stand for? CST typically stands for Catholic Social Teaching. And it is that, of course. One of the things I think is true about Catholic social teaching, and I think it's more obvious in Pope Francis's Catholic social teaching, is that it draws on sources that exist already. So, one of the things that Francis continues to do is to stand in a tradition with his predecessors, and his predecessors tended to refer to the tradition of Catholic social teaching dating back over 100 years, and to draw on previous statements of previous popes and to use them again in a new situation and say, what does this mean today? So, for example, John Paul II, writing Centesimus Annus, celebrating the 100th year of Catholic social teaching, was bringing it to a new stage, bringing it to a new place, bringing it to a new era, and saying, what can we draw from this tradition and how can we help it to develop? One of the things that Francis is quite well known for doing is also quoting teachings of bishops' conferences. So, for example, in Laudato Si, which is the encyclical I'm most familiar with, he quotes the Dominican Bishops' Conference, he quotes bishops' conferences from Latin America and South America, in what he's doing, drawing them into this tradition. And since I know from your introductions that many of the people that are here today are either members of or affiliated with religious orders. You will probably also be able to add to that list the teaching of major superiors of religious. I've learned a lot about the Catholic social understanding and Catholic social teaching from the rector majors of the Salesians of Don Bosco in the 30 odd years that I've been a Salesian. And that starts to say to us that this body of teaching is a wider body than perhaps at first we tend to think, that it's made up of papal teaching. It is made up of papal teaching, and the papal teaching draws on other things as well, and other things contribute to the growing body of work. And I think that's a really helpful first step for us, because it draws us in. Is that everything about CST though? And you might notice that most of my questions are rhetorical, and many of them expect you to all say, probably not, Martin, tell us some more. Because the thing that then occurs to me is, well, what do you teach for? One of the major things that Salesians of Don Bosco do internationally in the 132 countries in which we're present in the world is we teach. You teach for a purpose. You don't just teach for the sake of it. I like to think that some of my theology students at the University of Roehampton are learning theology for the sake of the discipline, but I need to be realistic. Many of them are learning so that they can get a job afterwards. They want to do something with what they are learning. So at the very least, teaching seeks to help people to learn. And surely that's what Catholic social teaching has been about ever since it started. It's been about trying to help the Church to learn that these principles that CST is built upon are ones that apply in the Church's life. And one of the things that I think is true, if you look at the development of the body of CST, understood as teaching, is that as the tradition continues, it grows in part because of the learning that's happened. Things get fed back in. So, at its best, there's a positive feedback loop between teaching and learning and teaching. How might we put this if we were to use the principles of CST itself to do it? What I'd like to do is to think about this positive feedback loop using Mater et Magistra from John the 23rd, in which he brought in to the CST tradition a way of understanding this feedback that he got from Joseph Cardine and the Catholic worker movement. So it's a great example of this feedback loop. What John the 23rd says in Mater et Magistra is that there are 3 phases in this process. The first one is to use the idea of see, and we could understand that as one of the tasks of Catholic social teaching is to help the Church to recognise things that perhaps the Church hasn't recognised, or hasn't recognised enough, or hasn't recognised it's the Church's task to be involved in these things previously. On the basis of that, the readers are invited to judge not just the teaching, but the way that they might learn from that teaching, how they might put that into action in their lives. And then, therefore, the third phase is to act. And this see, judge, act methodology is proposed in Mater et Magistra by John the 23rd as a way of doing CST. And of course, if the action is to play a part, it also plays a part in feeding back into the seeing. And this positive feedback loop is exactly what the Catholic worker movement was and remains working on. It's a way of understanding how this process happens. So if we were to say, well, can we find a CST acronym that fits this process? I think the answer is obviously yes. And I've been using the word already. Because if we use the language of CST, we can call this a Catholic social tradition. And what this helpfully does, I think it's a bit like the way that Pope Francis uses integral ecology. Because one of the interesting things that he does in integral ecology in Laudato Si is he speaks of it as a more encompassing understanding than integral human development. Integral human development is part of integral ecology, and so are lots of other things as well. So he gives us a master narrative within which what we're already familiar with can continue to play its role and can continue to do it in a new way which contributes to something which is bigger still. And I wonder whether this might help us, because we do talk about tradition a lot in the Roman Catholic Communion. We do talk about the importance of a developing tradition, of a tradition which is responsive to the signs of the times, of a tradition that seeks to see clearly in order to act well. And I think these principles are very much applicable to the kind of things that we'll be talking about today, because each of these parts of this developing Catholic social tradition can find their home within the development of our work together as a pilgrim people, as a people of hope. So if we translate it back into teaching language, how might we put this kind of back into more obvious CST language? I'm not saying that Tshidzu Jact is not CST language, it is. But what I want to do is to finally bring us back and say, okay, if we go back to thinking of C in the form of teaching, in the form of magisterial teaching, in the form of papal magisterium, local leaders magisterium, and magisterium coming from leaders of religious congregations at national, regional and local level, then how might we badge this? How might we talk about it? So, going back to the original idea that I have of teaching and learning, Catholic social teaching can be thought of as part of the Catholic social tradition. A really important part, quite possibly the foundational part, quite possibly the part where it begins. That the teaching of the various different magisteria that we respond to as Roman Catholic Christians teaches us to think more deeply, to reflect, to judge, to put something into action. So, alongside Catholic social teaching, I'd like to now make a claim that we could call something CSL, Catholic social learning, because that learning is about reading the documents. It's about getting together to discuss the documents. It's about trying to figure out what does this mean for us? What is it calling of us? What response are we being invited to make by God by reading this material together and seeking to understand it more deeply? And of course, hardly surprisingly, action. We've got to do something. We've got to put the teaching into practice, because if the teaching is not put into practice, then probably one of the most famous sayings about Catholic social teaching remains the case that it's the Church's best kept secret. It has to be put into action so that people can see it at work. So I'd like to suggest that there is such a thing as Catholic social teaching, there is such a thing as Catholic social learning, and there is such a thing as Catholic social practice. And I think actually all of these are embedded in what we traditionally understand as CST. What they might be is embedded in a way which is not immediately obvious, because we tend to relate it to teaching most of the time. And if we think about it as a developing tradition, we can think of it as a developing tradition of teaching, a developing tradition of the Church engaging with that teaching and learning from that teaching, and a developing tradition of the Church putting that teaching and learning into practice in how they act. And I think that makes it a really exciting possibility for us gathered today, because I think one of the things that developing Catholic social tradition invites us to do, who are gathered here today, is to think about how the day-by-day management of finances of different institutions can play a part in this process. How can we be part of this? How can we be drawn into that pilgrim people of hope even more strongly, even more deeply, so that we can play our part in the development of this tradition. Thanks very much.
Good to be here with you today. I'm pleased to introduce to you the Franciscan Sisters of Mary, a congregation of Catholic women religious based in St. Louis, Missouri. As we said, glad to hear you're a Billiken father, and that's wonderful. I'm pleased. Few people would know what that means. I'm here to share the very basics of how FSM has integrated mission and its focus into its investment program. Everything at FSM centers around our mission and focus. So that's the place to start. And so the mission of FSM is to be the presence of the loving, serving, compassionate, healing Jesus. And flowing from that mission is a focus on the compassionate care of creation in collaboration with others. They're very much a Franciscan-centric concept, Laudato Si, and so on, right up our alley. Our approach to integrating mission into our investment program, I think, is rather simple, straightforward, but effective. This is an excerpt from our investment policy statement. We state a preference for greater mission alignment when we are selecting our investments. And that preference for greater mission alignment is a significant factor, significant along the lines of return, risk, safety, liquidity, the sort of things that one might be accustomed to seeing in terms of significant factors. And we go on to state the types of investments in the order of preference that we'd like to see to be more mission aligned. The first is impact investing, which, yes, generates financial returns, but it also generates measurable positive benefits in terms of impact for societal benefit and environmental benefit. After that, we like to tilt our portfolios to companies that score better relative to environmental, social, and governance factors. And in the case of our equity portfolio, we can tilt towards companies that are more Catholic values aligned. And we're pleased to do that. And at the bare minimum, and this is for all portfolios, we are applying negative screens. We don't want to own any companies that are any way counter to our Catholic values, our FSM mission and focus. You're probably used to seeing pie graphs when you're looking at investment performance or how you've allocated your assets, whether it be cash, equities, or fixed income. We do that too, of course, but we also do a pie graph like this. We want to show at any given point in time, in this case at the end of 2024, how well mission aligned are we relative to our preferences. And 32% of our portfolio at the end of last year were in impact investments, 61% were in positive screen portfolios, and 7%, just the bare minimum, in negative screens. Excuse me one second. And then zeroing in a bit on that 32%, 12% of these investments are in publicly traded securities and 20% in private investments. Now, most of these 32%, we get assistance from groups, advisory services, and these are all market rate impact investments. They're focused in the areas of what is our focus, including renewable energy, generation and storage, resource efficiency, conservation forestry, sustainable agriculture, and on and on and on. But here's the problem. Our advisors will not help us with all impact investments that are out there to consider them for us. And those that are considered impact first investments that might pay some return that's below market rate, they're not going to help us. Not that they don't want to, but they're just not capable of doing that for the broad scope of their investment clients. So we'd be shut out of what we consider to be the best impact investments out there, the most impactful for all those areas that we care most about. But thankfully, there's a community of practice that's been active for years now that helps us in this regard so that we're able to make some of these investments, and I'm going to show you 4 of those. But before I do that, I'm going to show you the 3 people. Uh-oh. Here we go. Uh-oh, back up. Oh, can you help me with that? Sorry. I'm not right in the center after all. There we go. All right, these are 3 people, Kyoko Lyons, Tyra Blickham, Sarah Smith. These are all people that are working for Catholic institutions that have more advanced investment programs that they work. And they're skilled professionals, investment professionals who are doing the due diligence work, who are sourcing these deals. These are highly experienced analysts. And best of all, they're collaborators. And so what they're able to do is share with us the work that they're doing so that we can be well informed, we can be responsible fiduciaries into determining how some of these investments might work into our portfolio. And we're talking about diligence of the highest rigor. And so for that reason, and these people in particular, these 4 investments we are either in or we're about to enter. The first one is Total Impact Capital. This is the Total Impact Capital notes. They're investing in intermediaries, primarily in the Global South, all emerging countries, most in sub-Saharan Africa, across different themes of water, sustainable agriculture, microfinance, and so on. This is available at a 5-year term. It's all notes, and all the ones I'm going to show you are debt. So essentially loans in that sense. 5% rate of return and a minimum of $100,000 investment, so that's relatively low entry point. So that's one. Another one is Sun Wealth. Now this is a United States-based one. It is solar and a community-based approach. These are all community level. And nearly all are focused in low to mid-income area communities. They partner with local communities, local developers. So it has that very community local sense. And they have either a 3-year or a 7-year note. A minimum is very low, $25,000. It makes them very unique. And a return of up to 6.5%. Why? By the way, I'm not advising you on doing any of these. I'm sharing with you what we're doing. Okay. And how we got into them. So Josephine can appreciate that, I'm sure. The next one is SIMA. This is a new one that we're entering into now, doing solar projects in sub-Saharan Africa. And they're not the panels on the home or the big utility base. These are commercial and industrial level projects. They too work with local developers to get these done. It's a longer note, it's 10 years, but it's very, very low risk because it's what's considered the most senior of the debt out there. And over a 6% annual return. And the last one, I have to say, I saved the best for last. I am, again, not doing well. Here we go. It must be me. Vita Green Impact Fund. If you haven't heard of this, again, I'm not advising you to do this, but Vita is an aid agency based in Ireland that work in Eritrea and Ethiopia. And they have, through this impact fund, they are fixing water points in these communities, installing high efficiency cook stoves, and planting trees. It's all community based. The community has to want to participate. What's cool, there's so many elements of this that I absolutely love. It's so much Laudato Si in action. It's the women who are building these cook stoves, so they're paid to install these cook stoves. It's through carbon credits, and the best that there are, gold standard certified, and the profits, portion of the profits, in addition to paying back your investors, are circulated back to the communities. So if we want to talk about Catholic social teaching alignment, this is the least extractive. This is circular. This is subsidiary. So I happen to know the folks at Vita, and they're wonderful. So anyway, I could crow on and on about them, but I'm going to wrap it up to say, well, I'm really glad we were able to make these investments because of the three people I mentioned, but there's a lot more people in this community practice, this Catholic community practice. And yes, James, your face is on there because you are one of the people that are part of this. And there's a lot of others too that I could have added but didn't have room. So 10 years ago, we started calling people around to say, who's interested in this impact investing? Catholic people I knew. And there was two types of responses. One was lukewarm. Well, let me know how that goes. And then there was one like, I want in. Tell me when it's going to happen. And just this level of enthusiasm. And so generally, these are the people that had that reaction over the years and are part of this community. It's collaborative, working together, sharing what we know, and being part of it together. And it is the most wonderful thing because it is community in the best sense. The Spirit is somehow involved in all this. And so I'm going to leave it at that and say one more. I'm trying to get it right. Sorry for the, I don't know if that's offensive in any way, my shirt, but I was in Ireland and gave the same presentation. And I'm a handball player, and they have the best handball players in Ireland, so sorry all about me. I am happy to talk to anybody, one-on-one. Helena, we talked a few years ago, and then you all there got quite engaged in this and are part of that community I speak of. And so you just want to talk or just, curious or exploring. This community, there's no charge, it's just people. And so anyway, I'm going to stop there, and that should do it.
Thank you so much to our speakers today. And as I was listening, I was kind of getting very, very excited again. I often joke that I'm a closet Catholic, but sometimes it's really nice to be proud. And part of what I really felt when I first started working on this resource, on this toolkit, was a sense of really wanting to see my church in action and really understanding that there is an urgent need out there. And in so many ways, historically, the church has been a strong leader, and that's part of what keeps my faith burning bright. And also recognizing that the church faces certain challenges. And so to me, this really came at a really important time in both understanding the missional need of speaking on this for the church. And it was really in working on it that I felt like a way of being re-evangelized in rediscovering the rich heritage and tradition within the church. Okay. And so in part of thinking about what is the purpose of this toolkit, there are wonderful resources that are around and that are available, and some have come from the Vatican, so I'm in no way trying to compete with that. But what we did want to do was create something that was very user-friendly, something that you could use in different ways within your organizations, and that spoke, as I mentioned earlier, directly to the climate crisis and our response to that, and how we make our faith something that is practical and that is active and alive. a key aspect of thinking about how you might use this toolkit. It's something that we consider could be helpful for individual study, so perhaps this is something you're interested in, or perhaps your order is wanting to look more into its response to the climate crisis, and so we considered this as something that you might use on an individual basis to read through and start to, again, be inspired by and catalyze new thoughts, new conversations, and new discussions. As has been discussed already, we are not offering investment advice. We are a charity. I'm a campaigner. So this is really about how can we catalyze a movement, how can we catalyze a community of practice that we have heard spoken about today. So part of how you might want to use this toolkit is perhaps in a group reflection, perhaps if you're on retreat with others in your order and wanting to think through these areas. Another way you might want to use it is maybe involving it in part of your induction and your welcome to new committee members to say, this is something that we're thinking about, this is something we're interested in, and perhaps you might want to inform yourself about our tradition, and perhaps training those who have been on your board for quite some time as well. And then finally, in thinking through maybe providing this to your investment managers. Again, we've heard today, they work for you. So in thinking about what could help them to bear your charism particularly in mind, what could help them especially to align better with your values. So those are some of the use cases that we considered this toolkit. It also has links to all those resources that I mentioned, so not only the encyclicals, Mensurum Bonum, at the back as well. And it is very much in draft format at this stage. So part of what we're keen to do at Operation O is not just create things that collect digital dust on websites. We're keen for this to be something that is useful and helpful to you. And so if, as you're going through it, perhaps on your way home, you think, oh, actually, it would be really interesting if it included this, or take this out, I don't know that this would be helpful in my committee. I'm very, very open to receiving your feedback, your thoughts, and some of you have already contributed to that. So huge thanks for some of the feedback that has helped to shape this toolkit so far. So the structure and format of the toolkit is really taking that CST tradition and applying it specifically to how can we think about it in terms of the climate crisis. So I've looked at 7 pillars of Catholic social teaching, from life and dignity of the human person, and specifically as relates to integral ecology, care for creation, preferential option for the poor. And we've looked at, well, what has the church said about all of these pillars? And then we have suggested ways in which, oh, sorry, I thought I wanted to go back one. Nope. Okay. Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Great, okay. And then what we wanted to do with the individual pillars is to say, well, where can we look in the world and better understand this? So yes, we can read the IPCC International Panel on Climate Change's reports that they publish every year from the United Nations. We can take those on board, but where can we go in our own communities to better understand the impacts of flooding on poorer communities? Where I live, I have an art studio that was flooded last year. So when I bring people to that and I point out the flood defenses that we have in our old building, it's a way of really making this land and become something that is even more real for me and in my work, but also in then bringing that into our discussions. So how can we go and see that in the real world? Then when we're thinking about how do we judge it, we've included some questions that you might want to consider asking, again, within your own committee, within your congregation orders, but also asking your investment managers. Some of the questions are really tough, and some of them are I'll say it because I wrote some of them, idealistic. We want to be ambitious about the change that we can make in the world. And so part of our presenting the toolkit to you today is to say, for you to come back to us and say, actually, we've tried having these discussions, it's not working. Help us to understand what are some of those bottlenecks. So in the judge section, we have some of those questions that you might like to consider interacting with. And finally, in the act section, we have actions that you might take. And some of those include, which my colleagues will introduce later, the Green Investment Declaration. Are there areas in our investment policies that we can start to implement so that we really embed these principles into our ongoing investments and actions and as part of our policies? The final thing I would also say is that we see our investments as part of a holistic response to the climate crisis. Some of the things that our orders will be doing will be in person. So I've been on marches with sisters, and some of the changes that religious orders and the Catholic Church might want to make might be in grants and donations. And so we're looking specifically at investments today, but we consider it to be part of a holistic response to the climate crisis. I want to just conclude with some of the examples that we've heard about today. It's really powerful when we can see what others are doing. And one of the things that we'd really like to encourage you to think about doing is maybe providing us with some of the case studies of what's happening in your organizations. I think wonderful things happen, and so often I don't think enough people know about it. And I think it's a side and a face of the church that I would really love the world to see, but to inspire other organizations as well. So we've put some of those case studies in this resource, but we'd be keen to hear more and be keen to encourage you to share those with us, those that you are happy for us to share with others as well. And just to go back to really what's at the core of this, this teaching is about care for our neighbor. It's about love for our neighbor and love for each other and our communities. And it seems ever more important as we go through increasingly difficult times, both politically and I'd say economically as well. So this, to me, is a really important way in which we can be, I mentioned before, this beacons of hope. I will now let Clare introduce our Green Investment Declaration. Thanks.